Hello all, welcome back to another lesson with Rivera Fine Art Studios. Today I want to talk about the anatomy of the nose. So I'm going to use this example. This was an old site-size drawing that I had done several years ago. And this was done in pencil. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to examine the structure of the nose in this drawing. I'm going to do a series of different noses on this piece of paper. And I'm going to talk about specifically the bone structure, where the nasal bone fits into all this, and then the individual planes, which essentially are created by the cartilage of the nose. Okay, so one of the first things that I'm going to look at is the plumb line. So this line sets up the angle of the nose. Now, if we're thinking about that line, that starts right where the bridge of the nose and the brow ridge meet, right about there. And then where the nose again meets the face, down here. So basically where the septum attaches to the rest of the face. So that line travels through and it's moving at an angle that way. Now that's not to be confused with the front plane of the nose. The front plane of the nose moves out at an angle like this. So once I've established that plumb line, what I can do is mark where the top of that nose would be, and then also where the bottom would be. In this case, our head is tilted, so everything is moving at a slight angle. The next thing we can do is start breaking the nose up into a series of planes. So if we just look at the most basic planes that we have, the nose is a planar structure. Really a block-like form. It's one of the most block-like forms that you'll find on the face. You have a very distinctive front plane, side plane, and then also a bottom plane. Now I try to construct this geometrically. I try to really look at the way that these planes come together, and I think of it as a box. So we think about now the front plane moving out at an angle this way. Then we have the bottom plane, which falls into shadow, very distinctive box-like shape right here. So this is essentially where all of that shadow, darker shadow comes in, and then we have the side plane right here. One thing that happens as we move from the top of the nose to the base, it gets wider. Particularly the side plane tapers out. It gets wider at the base down here, and it's much narrower at the top. The front plane tapers a little bit as well. Now, it's important to think about when you're looking at the nose, the structure of these planes is going to change based on the angle that you're looking at the nose from. So, for example, if I was to look at the nose from beneath, so let's say if she was to tilt her head back, the bottom plane would become much longer, much higher. I would see much more height from here to here. And I would also notice that the bottom of this, again, is much wider where it attaches to the face. Right in here, where we have the septum, is very wide. It's a wide form, and then as it moves forward away from the face, it becomes much narrower. The other thing that would happen is these planes would become much more foreshortened. So this would shorten a great deal, this front plane and the side plane as well. Okay, so the proportion of these planes can change a lot based on the angle that you are viewing the nose from. Okay, so I just dropped the bottom plane down into a little bit of shadow, very light, just to help me separate those planes. It makes it visually a little bit more distinctive to find those separations. So I'm going to just smooth it out a little bit with my brush. Now we can start to even look at some of the structure of the nose beneath these planes. So basically what happens is A good part of this top portion of the nose is the nasal bone that projects out at a slight angle. So now we're looking at this, this front plane moving in this direction. Okay, so I'm still starting at the same point where I had that plumb line. I'm just coming out a little bit. That is where the nasal bone projects out, and then there's a cavity that sits back in here. It actually angles back this way. Everything beyond that point is cartilage. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to my red pencil here to just kind of mark out where I am seeing this cartilage. Now on some people, there will be more of a pronounced bump right here. She has a fairly straight nose. Everything is very subtle. So that, that angle does not protrude out too much. But the cartilage pretty much fills up where this nasal cavity would be. And it creates a shape that does something like this. So it actually points down right here. You know, following that center line, that where that point is would be consistent with the center line. And then this is actually called the lateral cartilage. This little shape right here. So I'm just going to make a note on the side here. Create a little diagram to label some of these things. And when you're feeling your own nose, if you press on your own nose, you'll feel where it gets soft. So you'll feel a point where it's hard, and then a point where it becomes soft. And where it becomes soft is the cartilage. Then you have two shapes that sit right in here. So there's actually a split. If we look at this, on this drawing where it develops the values a little bit more, the shadow coming off the edge of the nostril, that's a very slight indentation. That's where this split occurs that I'm drawing now. It does something like this. It comes up, again filling in the space right in here where I have my nasal aperture, and it comes down like so, and actually comes all the way in like this. And then it actually comes down and tucks right under here. So it's creating a shape that does something like that. On the other side over here, so we'll call this big shape the ball of the nose, and then over here we have the wing. So this is pretty much the outer edge of the nostril that comes down like so. And this shape also tucks around. Something like this. This might be a little bit wider right here. Okay, so basically where these two shapes come together, that essentially is what forms the shape of the nostril. Make that much darker so that it can be seen more easily. So there's definitely a structure to the shape of that nostril. And now I've changed this a little bit from here. Hers is much more subtle. But if we look at this, there's an angle along this side, and then you can kind of see this little bit of turning. Sometimes if you just overlap the line, so if I extend that line down a little bit more, it helps to show that that's a hollow space. A lot of times what I see students doing is making the mistake of just making the nostril look like a blob. So you don't want to do that. You really want to think of it as a hollow space and look at the structure. Look at the planes of these forms around the nostril, because that's going to help to form the nostril. Okay, the other things that we see is that there is a slight angle right here. So from the edge of the nostril down to the septum, this is actually the lowest point, right about here. So you creates a slight V shape. You know, if I was to look at it in a more geometric way, it's doing something like that. Okay, but now what I can do is use some of these structures of these planes and apply it to what I see here, looking at these shadows. So again, we said that all of this bottom plane really falls into a darker shadow. But coming over here, I can see that there's some shadow right along the edge of the wing here. And then I get a distinctive ridge right here, just coming right up along the side of this plane. Doing something like that. I also see there's a little bit more of a transition here, where it starts to transition into a bottom plane. And then I can see a little bit of a shadow coming up along the side of this ridge. So all of those structures are really visible. I've just softened everything in here, but we can really see how the anatomy, this underlying anatomy of the nose, forms those planes, and essentially it forms the light and the shadow. Okay, a couple of other little things that we see when we're looking at this bone right here. Now a lot of this does depend on the light as well, but many times you will see a very pronounced shadow right here where this form is. Now that's a pretty strong plane change right there. If we think about lines wrapping around this form, be doing something like this. So we come across, and then you have this very abrupt little dip right there, and then it comes back over this way. Just darkening the line right where that little dip happens. Okay, and then even when we start moving into the cartilage, sometimes that ridge will just continue down a little bit, but it starts to get softer right there. A lot of times people have sort of a diamond shape right in here. Okay, so there's a bit of an indentation right there. And then once again, that form starts to soften out. Basically, when you get to the ball of the nose, that's where everything becomes very soft and squishy. Just going to throw a little bit of value tone over this to indicate those planes a little bit more. Okay, so I just want to finish up by zooming in and giving you a close-up view of the nose in this drawing. So this drawing, as I said, is still underway. I still have a bit more work to do on it, but you can see how I am applying my knowledge of the planes to this drawing with shading. So in the demo that I just did, I separated everything with bold outlines. I'm still very aware of all of those structures in this drawing, but rather than using line, I'm just doing everything with value tone. So learning how to draw these forms is very important, learning how to recognize them, but then also learning how to apply them to a drawing in a realistic, natural-looking way. So as you kind of develop your understanding of anatomy, it becomes more and more second nature. Then you can very easily apply it to your portrait drawings and your figure drawings.